Thanks, Julie.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to AFP's EV webinar. I'm delighted to introduce myself, Julie Summerall. I'm an AFP director and your host for today. I'd like to introduce my colleagues, James Pester from AFP, who is also an AFP director, and Paul Hollick, our chairman. And our presenters today, importantly, are Lorna McAteer, Fleet Manager of National Grid, and Simon King, Director of Sustainability and Social Value at Mighty. Before we begin the presentations, I'd like to advise you that we'll be recording the webinar to allow members to review content at a later stage, and we'll be having a Q&A session following the presentations. As you can see, we've got quite a full agenda, so I'd like to kick off straight away by introducing and handing over to Paul Hollick, who's going to provide us with an update on AFP, EV and LCV committees. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks very much, Julie. James, I can't at the moment. I'm obviously not sharing my, can everybody see me?
Yeah.
Yes, can see you, Paul.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So I just wanted to give everybody an update of the EV committee for the AFP and share some of the outputs that have already started to come out, which I think is really great stuff. Just to give everybody an overview of the committee and the makeup of the committee is chaired by Stuart Lightbody and myself. From an AFP perspective and representatives from the AFP, we've also got Denise Lane as AFP and Capita, and Chris Joyce, who is ex-SG Fleet. In terms of fleet operators, we have Lorna and Simon, who are on today's webinar, Eric Bristow from Schindler, Ken Needham from Foxtons, Duncan Webb from ISS, Graham Short from Zipwater, Steve Cuddy from Close Brothers, Dale Einan from DEFRA, Craig Logan for Vodafone, and we are ably supported by Fleet Service Support in the form of David Watts from Arval, Chris Chandler from Lex, Ian Macbeth from Enterprise, and John Curtis from Go Ultralow. Now, obviously, David and Chris also help support the internal Arval Lex. And Ian obviously as well supports the internal enterprise fleet as well. So they are de facto fleet managers as well. So it's really great to have such a strong EV committee and such great thought leaders in the marketplace to be able to help us push forward our roadmap for EV adoption in the UK marketplace. James, can you move on to the next slide for me, please? The key things, so instead of just trying to cover everything, the committee is currently focusing on a few areas. The first area is fleet policy amendments for EV deployment, and that's starting to give everybody to eventually create some best practice guides in the marketplace about what fleet managers should be doing within their fleet to aid EV deployment, and also some of those skeleton clauses that you will ideally have within your fleet policy when you're running electric vehicles. We're also looking at mindset changes, how to create that cultural and behavioural change for widespread adoption. And again, that's really important from our perspective to start to engage for fleet managers to be able to engage their stakeholders. That's their board, procurement, HR, finance, but also mainly their drivers, and how to encourage their drivers to get into electric vehicles and to want to use these vehicles and to be passionate about using these vehicles in the right way. To really start to gain widespread adoption. And finally, we're looking at AER rates. Currently in the UK, they're set at 4 pence per mile. They've been fixed for quite a number of years. And it's really important for us to, as a committee, to review those AER rates and see whether we think they're fit for purpose. So James, next slide, please. Just a snapshot of some of the calculations that we've been going through and just looking at some of the key outputs from the committee. So this slide is, there's a more complicated slide, couple of calculations behind this as well. But this is the stuff that we're starting to look at. And this is the cost per mile for the majority of the electric vehicle cars available in the UK marketplace. Now, on this spreadsheet, we're assuming that the standard UK tariff is 16 pence and the public charging per kilowatt hour cost on the public highway is 30 pence. But as you can see from all these vehicles, they have a slightly different profile depending on whether you're charging in the summer, in the mild weather, or in the winter. And they're obviously increasingly more expensive as well if you're exclusively using public charging, again, more expensive in the winter than in the summer. So we start to look at all of these vehicles and work out, okay, is 4P fit for purpose or not? And the view actually is it is, as long as the employees are charging at home. As you can see here, if you're charging on a regular basis on the electric highway, sadly, if you are paying an expensive charge, you could actually be paying more than an equivalent diesel or petrol vehicle per mile to run. But of course, it's important that we try and push the drivers into low cost energy solutions where you're not blowing your brains out in terms of cost. James, next slide, please. So some of the key findings, just to give you guys on this webinar, just an overview of some of the key findings that are coming out from the EV committee. Now, one of the key things is that the belief from the committee is the AER rate at the moment is okay at 4 pence. And of course, although you might have as fleet managers having some employees that are complaining about the fact that they feel that they are not recompensed properly because they are being charged by their electric provider more than 4 pence a mile. The view of the committee was actually maybe they should think about it in the terms of the benefit in kind that the employees are saving on zero benefit in kind tax for having and running an electric vehicle at the moment. The committee as well, with the feedback that we've had as well, we're assuming that energy costs will come down with the involvement of the regulator in early 2020. So that 14, 15 pence per kilowatt hour that employees are currently paying domestically, or maybe even 16 pence, should start to come down to make the 4 pence a little bit more realistic. But also the feedback that we've had from the committee is you can actual rates can work too. It takes some time to set up, but if you want to pay your employees rather than the 4 pence per mile actual rates, those work too. That said, when we're looking at vans, and I'm sure Simon will touch on this and maybe Lorna will touch on this later, if you are using electric vans, 4p is definitely not enough, and you will really have to use actual rates on any electric commercial vehicle that you're running to reimburse employees effectively. And as I mentioned earlier, electric highway costs at more expensive networks could be more expensive than diesel pence per mile. So again, fleet managers out there, just be careful about the costs that you might be burning. I've been on previous webinars where I've been talking about choice lists and setting up choice lists for electric vehicles. And although no one that I've spoken to that is an AFP or an ICFM member would run their choice list based on capital cost or purchase price of vehicles, there are still a lot of fleet managers out there still running their choice lists on capital cost and purchase price. And the only way to get electric vehicles onto your choice list is to run it on a whole life cost basis. That has to be done. And to be honest, if you're not doing that, it's a disgrace. So please change it over immediately. Mythbusters as well. There's a lot of interest in, we had quite a funny examples where employee education is fundamental. Believe it or not, you will have employees within your business that think that they can't use an electric vehicle while it's raining because they might get electrocuted. Some employees will think that they can't charge up in the rain because you get electrocuted. This is unbelievably stupid stuff. But again, employee education is fundamental to this agenda. Employees need to be consulted, engaged, and they need to be aware of exactly what electric vehicles are there to do and how to run electric vehicles. And also some of the outputs we also got from the committee is knowing your data and your car park data is really important to work out who are the innovators, who are the employees that could go in first, and then the early adopters, and then start to push it out to widespread adoption. So that's again really important. And the biggest, interestingly, maybe a lot of people on this webinar won't be surprised, but the biggest issue for fleet operators is street parking infrastructure. So again, the AFP will be doing a lot of work on lobbying to try and get some improvements to that as best we can as well. James, another slide, next slide, please. And just to wrap up, just on my brief session, committee, which is again focusing a lot on EVs, but on EVans, future roads, risk, compliance and health, and the future mobility steering committees as well. So when we're doing these updates every couple of months, I will be providing more outputs about what's coming out from the other committees. And of course, you'll be seeing a lot in the press as well, and a lot of best practice advice and statements and PDFs and documents, and a lot on training as well from the AFP as well. So Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll now hand over to the rest of the day, and the rest of the session, I should say.
Thanks very much, Paul. So now to the presentations, obviously looking at the EV journey. Lorna will be sharing her experience starting out on her journey, and Simon providing a case study with lots of hints and tips. So our first presentation today is from Lorna from National Grid. Thank you, Lorna.
Thanks, Julie. So good morning, everybody, and Merry Christmas. So it's probably close enough to Christmas I get away with saying that now as well, hence the Christmas jumper and the Christmas earrings. So I have stopped short at reindeer antlers on my headset though. I've been at National Grid now for 14, 15 months. I think over half of that has now been within the COVID working from home situation. So my journey pretty much started the moment I arrived here. James, if you can move on for us, please. So I thought I'd start briefly with where I am on my fleet, and the astute of you, if you've watched me do this at Fleet Live the other month, then you'll notice that my car fleet has actually significantly moved in numbers. So I've got nearly 3,000 vehicles on fleet. I've got 344 full electric cars at the moment, and I've got another 161 on order. In fact, when I look at my order bank, I've only got 13 vehicles that are pure ICE that have actually been ordered by the staff. And I've got an order bank of over 400 vehicles at the moment waiting to come in. So it's a very good starting point. I've got 60 electric vans and 3 more on order, which is actually ahead of my plan. So this is where other parts of the business are now starting to say, actually, can we look at that? We've seen where they're working elsewhere and we'd like to take some of those. My problem area, as it will be for many people out there, is my 4x4s. So anyone in utilities, we don't really have a viable 4x4 solution at the moment. So those are still ICE vehicles, and I'm still exploring what we can do out there in that space. And the same goes for my 54 O license vehicles, my 1,000 bits of plant dotted around the place, and my 2 helicopters. I haven't really got a solution for those ones yet either. And drones aren't necessarily an option. So, James, if you can move on, please. Thanks. So net zero by 2030, what does it mean and how can you get there, and where has my journey started? So working through this, I came in and I had to have a plan. I needed to get people on board with what I wanted to do. I needed to understand what the company's direction was. I needed to figure out what their appetite was as well, and therefore how fast I could move if I needed to. So the decisions were, did I want to be leading in this space, or am I just going to take a steady step through it? Who did I need to engage with in the business, and how, more importantly, am I going to measure my success? Now, with electric vehicles, it's actually fairly straightforward, because if you take the next point, you set yourself a target and you just measure how many vehicles you've got against that on your trajectory. But when I was doing my plan, I was looking at upcoming legislation, and one of the early challenges I had, because I set this in place in January of last year, the target was still 2040 by the government and externally, and I had quite a tough job encouraging everybody and explaining internally that I really thought that was coming forward. It had already moved forward to 2035, and I expected it to be brought forward even further. And so I needed to get the buy-in. So went out and looked at all the legislation pieces, went talked to peers and colleagues, looked at associations, just worked out where we felt everything was going, and then set myself a target. By having that target, I managed to get the buy-in from everybody internally. And a target is just that. It helps you set direction. It's giving everybody something to aim for. How you get there is then up to you. And the government's helped us do that with its ICE ban in 2030. It doesn't mean you can't still have your ICE vehicles. And in reality, what that means when you're looking at your journey is those vehicles, you could buy your last ICE vehicle on December the 31st, 2029, and you can still run those for a while. So you've actually got more time than you think in doing this. So, but the target gives you something to aim for. It gives you something to help build your plan and work out what you can do. And you can then move as fast or as slow as you want to achieve that one. So for me, I started by looking at my fleet, and that takes us into my next bullet point really on control, what you can control. So when I looked at my commercial vehicles, 60% of my vans within their normal replacement cycles could be converted to full EVs. So looking at all their cycles, what they did, how they operated, where we could charge them, everything was within normal parameters. So I didn't actually have to go to any extremes. I think the hardest part I've had with some of that is getting some of our users out of their larger panel vans and into a smaller panel van. And it's just looking at how you operate and changing mindsets on, but I need that tool set because I've always carried that tool set with me. And it's a case of no, you can leave that at the depot and it can be shared. So with controlling what you can control, it's also looking at the policies that you put in place, and it's working within everything that you've got already. There is no point me today worrying heavily about HGVs. I can't control some of that just yet. The bits I can control are how I use them. Do I still need them? Can I reduce the demand? Can I keep talking to manufacturers? Can I work out what's coming to the marketplace? And I can keep looking forward to when that date happens, but I don't need to do anything yet on that one. So it's just breathing and not panicking when the government turn around and say, here you go, these are the targets we need you to work to. It's myth busting. Paul's already alluded to it at the beginning. It was one of the big topics within the AFP committee. You know, electric vehicles, especially right now, are not more expensive. It was an instinct I had, it was a belief I had, and then I spent 3 months modeling every single one of my cars on fleet over the next 4 years with all the government incentives, with the NIC Class 1A corporate element of it as well. I looked at what it would cost us for those same vehicles on those replacement cycles in those 4 years to buy an electric vehicle and then sell it. I did have to assume some RV costs, but I just looked at the corporate side of it. To lease those vehicles over that same period of time, to keep with pure ICE vehicles and to buy pure ICE vehicles. And then I also looked at a cash only option. And out of all of those options, the EV options came out more favorably, considerably more favorably when you looked at that whole life cost. What I didn't even include in that, and it's why I was immediately rubber stamped by our finance director, I didn't even look at the fuel savings or the potential savings of that. I didn't look at the personal benefit to some of the employees and anything else there. All I looked at was the corporate cost. What that then enabled me to do on my journey is I took the savings that the company was benefiting from on the NIC and moved it into my voucher values. So that initial cost of those cars, it meant those more expensive ones with those slightly better ranges actually fell into the grades that needed them. It meant there were more vehicle choices for people as we went through, and actually it was at a net cost. So all I did is balance the money across and move it around and made it work for the people. And the effect is what you saw in my fleet list. A few months ago, I was at 240 with 121 on order. Now I'm at 344 with 161 vehicles on order. I am under no illusion that the BIK zero benefit at the moment is having a huge impact on people's choice out there. But that's where you need to take advantage of those things and work it and explain to people in your myth busting as well on how that goes. And your education piece isn't just to the employees on where they benefit, it's to some of your other stakeholders as well. It's getting over the understanding of the charging infrastructure out there. And what we did is we set up an internal group, a little chat forum using our system called Yammer. and we let the EV people talk to others, and we let them help each other out, and they've become their own little community. So much so that we actually have quite a few drivers that live in sets of flats, don't have any home charging, obviously aren't coming into the office regularly at the moment as well, because not all of the offices are open, and they're still able to charge their vehicles and do their day-to-day, live their day-to-day lives without any hassles. And they've become some of our biggest advocates in helping to myth bust the fact that you can only have an EV if you've got an electric charge point at home. That is not the case. Even with our vans, we haven't bothered to put in charging points at home for our vans. They do go into depots, they do move around. They are an emergency call out for some of those. And it's just encouraging them to make and plan their journeys better. So it's more around the behaviour changes that need to happen than it is on the range anxiety side of things. And they're getting much more comfortable with it. They're loving the vehicles, actually. It's the positive side that they see when they turn up, and they get a reaction from the public that they're in an electric vehicle as well, which helps. What we have done is we've put some charging points in at each of the depots. We've made sure they've got access to the public charging network. And what we're noticing over time that they're using them is they are increasingly using that public charge network. A lot of that is because it's winter and they're not getting the range on those vehicles that they used to get in the summer. So that's something that's known, and it's something they're working with, and it's something they're not actually finding an issue. So kind of takes me into my other point, which is, as a fleet manager, don't panic about all of this. It's going back to that control what you can control. You don't need to make massive changes to your policy. It's an alternative fueled vehicle, and as such, they are just that. They're alternatives. So your car policy can pretty much remain the same. If you have a mileage limit on your car policies, and that's how you determine who gets a vehicle, there's no need to change it. If it still sits at 20,000, there are an awful lot of people out there driving more than 20,000 miles in an electric vehicle quite successfully. So you can keep an awful lot of what you've got in place, and it then makes your change and your journey so much easier to do. You don't need to have lots of meetings and trawl through your policy to say, right, if we do that for that person, we need to do that. I took the stance internally that we weren't providing any charge points to anyone. We've helped them, we've guided them, we've shown them the OZEV site, as they're now called, and the EST sites. We've helped them with their forms when they need to go for their grants, and we've just guided them, but we've allowed them to do it. And that helps remove some of your exceptions and what if scenarios. And that becomes very much then a genuine, right, you are a driver that we really can't see this working for yet. We'll look at something else a little bit later. So it removes an awful lot of the barriers. It moves an awful lot of your internal challenges on how you set things up. And actually, as a fleet manager, you're keeping most of your stuff the same. There are A rates out there. That's what I use for my company cars. And again, as Paul mentioned right at the beginning, when we're all discussing how and why, we've got some charging points at work that they use their own cards for, they register for them, and then they pay according to that. And ours are pass-through costs. So we don't give free charging in the offices. The commercial vehicles we give cards to in the same way we give them a diesel fuel card for when they're filling up their ICE vehicles. So for us, that process is exactly the same. And then those vans are on full reimbursement, but the cars claim their mileage. As I've said, some of those people that haven't got their charge points at home, they're actually finding free charging points that they can use at the moment. So it really does work at this point in time. And I don't see that changing dramatically in the next 2, 3, or 4 years. And then finally, the point I kind of want to make is don't be afraid to ask for help. Never have we all been in this state of flux and seismic change that we are now. Never have we all been pulled together as much as we have now. So network, communicate, ask. We are all on that same journey. And when I say that, that's fleet operators as well as the energy providers. Never before have the two industries had to work so closely together. And we're all learning from it. Everyone is, don't be afraid to make those mistakes as you go on that journey. We've probably all done it before. including me. I actually charged my vehicle up in my garage, but forgot to turn the power on to the garage. So got to it the next morning and realised it hadn't actually charged overnight. So I managed to get myself in the office and then panic about charging it when I got there. So we all make mistakes. We learn from them, and trust me, that one is one that I learned from very, very rapidly. So I think that's probably all I needed to say for now. I'm sure there's be questions later, and that's it. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Lorna. That was really useful, really helpful insight into your journey. I'd now like to go straight into Simon from Mighty and his presentation. Thank you, Simon.
Thanks very much indeed, Julie. If you could move on to the first slide, James. Thank you. Carry on again would be great. Excellent. Thank you. So good morning, everyone. Simon King, Director of Sustainability and Social Value at Mighty. Mighty, if you're not sure who we are the UK's largest facilities management business. So we do engineering, security, cleaning, landscaping, waste management, energy and sustainability for a whole range of blue chip clients across the UK and Ireland. The work that we've been doing on moving our fleet to zero carbon is part of Plan Zero. So one of the things that I've found has really helped me in making this a success at Mighty is that we're not just decarbonising our fleet as a standalone piece of work. It's absolutely part of our overall commitment to net zero carbon. Lorna was talking about the net zero approach for National Grid as well. So we've got a net zero commitment by 2025 for all of our operational emissions at Mighty. And so moving to an electric fleet forms part of that. And there's a load of detail about what we're doing, but it's really that we're trying to make that whole business zero carbon, not just the fleet in and of itself. Although the reason we focus so much on our fleet is it is over 90% of our operational emissions, given the nature of our business. We're providing services to clients and moving around from site to site. Next slide, please. So why are we doing this? And we talk about it being the end of the ice age. Now, the government have agreed with this now, as you will have seen, internal combustion engines being phased out for sale by 2030. But there are 5 reasons why it's the right thing to do. And we talk about the 5 Ps. Firstly, and Lorna and Paul have both mentioned this already, pocket. Electric vehicles are cheaper on a whole life cost basis than diesel vehicles. And therefore, you should be transitioning to them purely to save money. If you're running internal combustion engine vehicles, you are wasting your company money. And so you need to be looking at it purely from that point of view. The second one is from a public point of view. So whether you are a B2B or a B2C organisation, your customers are going to be demanding more and more sustainability focus. And we've seen things like central government have just put a 10% weighting on social value for all bids starting from the 1st of January. And Mighty have 15% weighting on ethical and sustainable supply when we run tenders. And recently, 86% of people in the UK agreed that they were either very concerned or concerned about climate change. So there's an increasing focus on this area, and you're expected to do something about it as an organisation. Clearly, there's policy changes coming, the most obvious of which being that 2030 phase out, which has just been announced, and we were delighted to see that. We're part of the UK Electric Fleet Coalition, and we've been lobbying for that because transport is an enormous part of the UK's carbon emissions. If you include upstream refining of oil, it's about 43% of the carbon emissions in the UK. And so phasing that out is fundamental to us achieving the net zero targets that we've all got. And given those targets, there will be more policy coming. If any of you are interested in the wider sustainability area and have read the 6th carbon budget of the CCC, then you'll see that there's a lot more stuff happening and expecting the phase out of HGVs, for example, from 2040. So there will only be more change coming. And I would always prefer to be acting proactively and getting ahead of it rather than reacting when someone else makes the decisions for me. All of that is to support the planetary challenge. There is still a huge issue from a climate change point of view. There's lots of great commitments that have been made, but if you actually look at even with the net zero commitments that are made, the current expectation is we will end up with at least 2.7 degrees of warming by the end of this century, which is catastrophic. It will have massive impacts around the world, including in the UK, but also particularly in less developed nations and in the global south. And so we all have an absolute obligation to take action now. And one of the biggest areas that we can all act on across the businesses is operational emissions. So that's the electricity that our businesses use, that's the heating that our businesses use, but also, and focus for today, the fleets that our businesses use. And given that it's the right thing to do from a pocket point of view and for what our clients want and to fit in with policy, then being able to help the planet is just a great added benefit. And then the last one is our people. Now, one of the things I was amazed to learn as I sort of started doing more work on this is how few people know how much tax they pay on their company cars. I kind of figured everyone understood it, but most people that I spoke to were actually surprised that there was this huge amount of tax they were paying. When you talk to a BMW 3 Series driver and they realise they're paying £4,500 a year in tax if they're a 40% taxpayer, and they didn't know about that, and you show them there's a way they can save that money, and actually get a Tesla instead, then they get quite excited quite quickly. Or equally, if it's an Astra driver who's on a 20% tax bracket, and you say that they can have another £100 a month in their pocket take home, that can be hugely compelling as well. So actually, we've seen that as we've done more education on this, the demand from our employees has grown, and people are trying to actually get electric vehicles faster and are contacting us proactively to say, when am I getting mine, rather than us having to try and force people down that route. So we've certainly seen that there's an opportunity to do this at zero cost to your business, and we see actually that we're saving significant money from making the change as well. Next slide, please. So from a Mighty point of view, this is just some facts and figures about Mighty as an organisation. We've got one of the larger fleets in the UK. We've just recently completed the Interserve FM acquisition, so we've now got over 7,000 vehicles on fleet. As of Friday last week, we had 856 pure electric vehicles on the road. So we think that makes us the largest pure electric UK fleet at the moment, although it's great to see that we've got lots of competition and people trying to catch us up, which is what we want to see. But we've made some really good progress there across both cars and vans. I'd agree with the point that Lorna made, that I think the one area I continue to be nervous about on whether we can go electric by the 2025 timescale we've set is 4x4s. I think actually some of the larger vehicles may come to market quicker. We're seeing some of the larger vehicles OEMs are saying there'll be options from sort of 2023, 24, but the 4x4s, there's nothing currently in the OEM pipeline until the Ford Ranger, which has got an on-road date of 2025, which is a bit tight for my liking. So that does continue to be the one area that we're nervous about, and we may end up having to offset those because there simply isn't a technology option. But all the cars, all the small vans, mid-size vans, large vans, we've got our first e-gritter will be going on the road in the next days. So even sort of gritting and tree surgery vehicles, water bowser carrying vehicles and so on, we can see a route to all of that being electrified. But as I say, 4x4s are one concern. Next slide, please. So when it comes to looking at what you need to consider for transitioning your own fleet, there are kind of three big areas that we talk about, and then sort of two supporting areas above them. So the three main areas are making sure you've got the correct vehicles, ensuring that there's the correct infrastructure in place, and then also considering what you need to do around driver behaviour and awareness. I'm going to come on to each of those three in a bit more detail in just a sec, but they're the main three areas that we consider. And then sitting above that, you need to have something which brings all of your data and information together. so that you can actually pay for electricity directly, and I'll talk a bit about what we're doing there. See how much electricity is being used at each of the locations, because it is very different to using a fuel card solution where you just give everyone a fuel card and that's your job done. Actually having that visibility on all of the various charging and how you manage that is crucial. And then you need to make sure you've got scalable solutions. So it needs to be thinking about the wider energy solution. So my phrase tends to be that it's no longer about vehicles. Fleet has moved beyond that. So it's no longer about vehicles, it's about having an integrated energy system, which happens to have cars and vans attached to it. So fleet managers are increasingly going to need to think as infrastructure managers, or bring in people who've got that ability to look at that, because getting the vehicles right is actually the easy part of this. So the scalable solution piece is also looking at how do you make sure you're doing things like buying renewable energy, that you've got the service maintenance and repair in place for the infrastructure you install, that you're able to reimburse employees and so on. So just to go through each of those three areas on the next slide, please, James. So things that we have learned as we've gone through the 850 odd vehicles so far, and so we've got about another 600 on order. So the things that we'd considered are on the correct vehicles. We've seen with our vehicles that if you can get more than about a 200-mile range, then it works in most instances. If you ask drivers how far they all drive about 35,000 miles a year. It's really quite astonishing. When you actually look at what they actually drive, it's significantly less than that. For our vehicles, it's about 16,000 miles a year on average. And so when you sort of look at a vehicle that's got 200 miles, then that gives you theoretically 1,000 miles a week, 52,000 miles a year. And now if you can take a bit off of that for real world, you're probably still talking about 40 to 45,000 miles a year with a vehicle that's got a 200-mile range. Now, if your vehicles are doing 16,000 miles a year, you've got quite a lot of headroom. And of course, there are days when people do a lot further, but they're few and far between. And we've seen when we've done the detailed telematics analysis of our vehicles that 70% of them do less than 70% of that 200-mile range on a daily basis, on an average basis. And only have one day in a quarter where they do more than that 200 miles. So effectively 70% of the vehicles, and not dissimilar to the number Lorna talked to as well, but you can just switch across without even really thinking about it. You do have to put some consideration in the other areas, but the vehicles are absolutely suitable to switch across. Making sure you've got clarity on what the OEM pipeline is. So we've completely changed how we buy vehicles. We were a Vauxhall fleet, and we had, I think we were the second largest buyer of Vauxhall vehicles anywhere. And so we were effectively sole supply. Not strictly true, we bought some BMW 3 Series and that sort of stuff, but all of our vans and job cars were Vauxhall. And we would do key for key ordering. Now we've completely changed that. We've now got if you name an electric vehicle that's available, we've probably got one on the fleet. So we'll buy from pretty much anybody if they've got a vehicle which meets our needs. And we've also moved to bulk ordering. Now, this is starting to change on cars. It's not as required now. But to ensure that we've had the right vehicles, what we were doing is ordering 50, 100, 150 vehicles at a time so that we knew that we had that vehicle availability. As I say, on cars, the availability is much better, and so actually doing key for key is increasingly possible. I think getting senior level engagement have really helped us. So I presented this to Phil Bentley, who's our chief exec. I spent ages on the Saturday writing my presentation ahead of meeting him on the Monday, worrying about it, went in to give him the presentation, and he basically turned around and says, no need to persuade me, great idea, just crack on. So I was delighted to have wasted my Saturday. But getting that senior support has been really key, because we do get challenges. There are people who don't want to do this, who are concerned about moving to electric. And when you've got that senior support, it makes it much harder to make rapid progress. We have an electric first approach. So our car policies and so on have not changed in any real regard, other than it's now electric. It isn't would you like a diesel or an electric? It's you're getting an electric. But in every other sort of regards, they've stayed the same. And the reason that we've done that is because yes, we want people to make the change and to say they're positive about it, but this is not optional. We've got a climate emergency. It's not a would you like to be involved, I'm afraid. We've got to absolutely take a leadership position and move across. And given that it's saving the company money, then there's no reason for that not to happen. We flex our policy a lot more. We probably used to review our policy on an annual basis at the most, because it was pretty static. We now don't actually publish the vehicles which are on our policy at each grade, because it changes every month. And so we will basically make sure that the vehicles are suitable for the job roles and the levels in the organisation, but we're changing it all of the time because the vehicles which are available change. We also, I think Paul explained this right out the front, you've got to, and Lorna has referenced it as well, whole life cost critical. If you're doing anything other than full whole life cost analysis, then you're not buying effectively. My background is as a CPO and procurement director, and this has got to be the way that you focus on it. So even if you are already looking at fuel and service maintenance and repair and so on, making sure you include things like national insurance contributions and so on, all of that needs to be built in, because when you do that, then you see quite how much of a saving the EV can make for you. Moving across to infrastructure, you've got to make sure that you've got the infrastructure in primarily wherever the vehicle sleeps. So where the vehicle spends its nights, or if it's used at night, where it spends its days, but wherever it sleeps and spends its downtime, that's the primary location to put your infrastructure in. For us, that tends to be home, including our vans. They tend to live at people's homes. And about 85% of our charging happens at that location. So that's the primary area. And then also having workplaces and public access. So we've put charging points across all of the mighty offices. We've also put them into key client sites so that people can charge at those locations, and then provide public charging access to our drivers as well. I know one of the questions that's already been asked is whether we insist that people pay the extra if they rapidly charge at public places. We don't. We basically take an integrated view that we're saving money across this piece, and therefore we will support people charging at home or at workplaces, and that where they then need to top up if they do have to do a long journey, yes, that is a higher cost, but it's a very low percentage of our charge instances, currently less than 10%. We've also made sure, and this is absolutely crucial for a commercial vehicle rollout, a van rollout, that we have a payment solution in place to pay for the electricity used by employees at home to charge their electric vehicles directly. So again, I know a lot of people ask, do you pay on AER or do you pay on actual payments? We don't use AER other than for people who've got their own vehicle, they've got a car allowance and they've gone electric, and I think we've only got 1 or 2 of those, because why would you? It saves you money getting a company car. So payment solutions is in place, however, for all of those commercial vehicles. So when someone charges at home, we pay for that electricity directly to their electricity supplier, and that means there's no cash flow impact on them. They're getting that cost covered. And it was an absolutely crucial part of us looking at the commercial vehicle rollout, because we can't expect people who are only driving on business to fund the fuel out of their own pocket, particularly when they can be lower paid members of our employee group. When you're looking at commercial sites, capacity is a big challenge. Typically, if you've managed your electricity supply well, you will have reduced the capacity at your sites to what you're actually using. And so managing relationships with DNOs, distribution network operators, is very important, as well as looking at how you can do load balancing. So how do you try and make sure that you flatten the demand throughout the 24-hour period? A lot of buildings will have a peak at a certain time of the day, and the capacity is rated for that. But there may be significant capacity, say, overnight. So how do you try and balance the load? And there are lots of ways you can do that, everything from sort of arrays on the charging systems through to battery storage, through to on-site generation. There's all sorts of different routes, but that's a really good opportunity. And then if you're thinking of doing this and you haven't already started asking for landlord approval, start immediately. Landlord approval took us longer than pretty much anything else, which was amazing to me, but given you're adding value to the landlord's building, but it did take a huge amount of time to actually get landlord approval. I think the other bit I would just say, and I would say this working for an infrastructure business, wouldn't I? But is, do you want to do all of that yourself, or do you want to bring in people who can do it for you? Because we found it a challenge, and this is what we do as an organisation. So I think that there is a role to play in looking at, do you invent it all yourself, or do you bring in companies who've been through it and done it, and they might be able to just shortcut get into it and make it easier for you. Then driver awareness and behaviour, as I mentioned, benefit in kind, people didn't seem to understand it. We also still have people who think that the vans will do like 60 or 70 miles, or that the cars are like milk floats. So there's a whole pace around how you actually raise awareness. We did lots of OEM roadshows and have created sort of how-to guides, and this is how you actually use your vehicle, and did for example, an ICE versus EV cell index. So it said, here's what your internal combustion engine car would be, here's what the EV equivalent is, and the sort of pros and cons of both, including to your pocket, and that would work very well to get people buying in. I mentioned as part of Plan Zero, the wider sustainability plan, and the last point I would just make on the drivers is comms. Just, in fact, I've just had an email this morning from one of the ops directors in one of our business units saying, "Oh, this is all a bit worrying. I don't think we should be doing it in my part of the business, etc., etc." Now, I probably do a webinar a week publicly, and we do a lot more than comms, than that internally. And yet, even now, 18 months into our plan, you still get that kind of response. And so, the more communication you can do, the better. Next slide, please. Clearly, as a business, we have a solution, so it would be remiss of me not to mention it. But we, as part of Plan Zero, Plan Zero is not just about doing it ourselves; it's about delivering for clients as well. Last year, we saved 300,000 tons of carbon for clients, which is the same as 11 Mighties. So there's a huge opportunity out there to decarbonise the UK. We want to help people do that, and so if you're looking for support, I'll happily have chats with people just about what we've done and things you might want to consider, through to we can actually just bring in some people who will actually deliver it for you, whether that be end to end or just the infrastructure piece. Next slide, please. So the last thing I would mention is this is just an example that we looked at for one of our clients. So it works for Mighty, but when we looked at this particular fleet, which is a smaller fleet now, as you can see, 450 vehicles, wide range of vehicles, everything from small cars up to sort of 18-ton vehicles. We saw that over a 4-year period, they would save about 4,500 tons of CO2. They would have an exit run rate saving of 727,000. And each driver on average saved £853 a year in tax. And we were able to, over that 4 years, it was going to be 78% of their emissions that could be reduced. Some of the larger, more complicated vehicles we said you'd come to later, but it just gives you a kind of indication of the sort of benefits that you can expect on a smaller fleet than the Mighty one that I've discussed. So that's everything I've got. I will leave it there and pass back for questions.
Thank you, Simon, and thanks everyone for your presentations this morning. We've had quite a lot of questions this morning, and so we're trying to get through all of those questions. Will be a challenge, I think, in the time we've got. So I'm going to answer those questions which that probably haven't been covered already, and then if you've got any further questions, please do contact our AFP administration centre, and then they can look into those for you with the panel after the event. So I know we've touched on some of these questions already, but the first one was, what's been the biggest obstacle both of you have faced in adopting EVs? I'd probably go for the absolute biggest obstacle, you would say.
I'll go first. I think, oddly enough, it was, I need to be careful. I need to find out who's on the audience before I answer this one. And apologies to any HR directors out there. So my local HR teams were great, but it was my corporate HR, and probably because we operate over in the US as well and in some other countries, that just want to give everybody cash. That's their answer to everything. So I was battling, and still am sometimes, in explaining that it is cheaper to go electric vehicle. It meets our scope 3 emissions, and actually cash for the next 4 years is not the right answer. And actually you need to do the EVs. But otherwise, all the other challenges, I think, because we'd gone out and done a lot of that myth busting and done the education piece right up front, I haven't really had any.
Okay. Simon?
I was fortunate that I didn't have some of the HR challenges. I think we managed to get a strong business case signed off sort of early on, as I said, at a senior level, and that kind of cascade down really helped. The biggest challenge, to be honest, is getting the infrastructure in place across thousands of drivers, particularly at home, and particularly that payment solution. That was the biggest issue that we had, was company car drivers. If we were doing it on a reclaim basis, that was acceptable, but it wasn't going to work for vans, and there wasn't any way of actually doing that payment process in the market when we started this 18 months ago. So we had to work with partners to develop that solution effectively, so that we could pay for electricity directly in people's homes. So that was certainly the biggest issue, and just making sure you've got infrastructure in all your sites. As I said, dealing with landlords and capacity issues and DNOs and so on, that kind of integration piece and managing your infrastructure was the biggest.
Yeah, and interesting, you mentioned about the EV actual cost reimbursement that you're doing at Mighty. What have been the challenges in adopting that approach? Because it's fairly unique out there, as most people are adopting the advisory electricity rates. So
we always did that method for diesel, so we already had the approach that we weren't paying AFR. We had fuel cards, and then we were deducting from salary private use. So that approach we kept the same. That didn't change at all. The only thing that changed is, rather than your data coming from fuel cards, you had to look at what the aggregation of all the various electricity usage was. We partnered with a couple of people. We use, as Paul won't mind, but as a plug, and we work with TMC, but other mileage companies are available, of course, but we work with TMC, so they supported us from that point of view. And then we've partnered with MENA on the home charge solution, and by bringing those sort of two pieces together, along with the software platform to bring together the data on charging, all we did really is replace the All-Star data with the data from those other sources, and then fed it into the sort of the existing payroll deduction process. So I genuinely think it's the best route forward, because AER doesn't work for vans, and so if you've got a pure car fleet, fine, crack on an AER and tell your drivers that they're saving a fortune on BIC and to stop moaning. I completely agree with that. But if you've got a van fleet as well, AER is not an option, so you're going to have to do it for your van fleet. And if you're doing it for your van fleet, extending it to your car fleet as well is not too complex. And we've got 65-70% vans on the fleet, so we had to get that right.
Brilliant. one of the questions just come in is regards to an area, I don't think we touched it in the presentations, in crash repairs and accidents. How are you finding the body shop work, the body shop crash repair network coping with the rise of EV vehicles, and particularly in application of EV accidents on your own fleets, Lorna?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and that's probably one area which is slightly weaker, but that's only because of timing as much as anything else.
Yeah.
So in terms of, and I'll tackle the cars and commercial fleets separately. So commercial fleets, we use Revis to help with us. They're really rolling out the training to all their guys, so we've got no issues whatsoever. And don't forget, a lot of the electric vehicles are all under warranty at the moment anyway, so you're going back into the main dealers to get the work done for those vehicles. So in terms of impacting our downtime, we're not seeing any major impacts on our downtime at all on our electric commercial vans. Cars are interesting because you're dealing with all the individual employees, and every single one of them insists that they must have a like-for-like replacement. Even though that's not offered even on their diesels right now, they still insist on it on the EV side. And that is a challenge because, of course, you don't have courtesy vehicles as electrics. We are looking at putting our hire vehicles in, but we haven't had that many issues. Most of the problems we've had with our electric cars have been blatant vandalism on them. We've had a couple of Teslas vandalized, or it's somebody else that's run into them. So we've only had one incident. So generally, it's fine. We haven't seen massive increase in repair costs on our vans yet. And for cars, it's too early to tell. We've seen less incidents of accidents, but we do expect those to cost us more in conversations we've been having with the insurers and the repair network. And we've not had any issues with any sourcing parts yet. Anything that's there is probably more COVID related than anything else.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lorna. Simon?
Yeah, we've seen lower accident rates with electric vehicles, which I think is what we expected. When we implemented AEB, autonomous emergency braking, across our fleet as standard, well, we did a trial first and then we did it as standard. This is when we were still mainly diesel. We saw about an 85% reduction in rear end collisions as a result of that, because of the technology. And so when you look at EVs, broad statement, but typically they've got better tech. And so we were expecting that to flow through into a lower number of accidents. That has been the case. My expectation was lower accident numbers, but higher per incident cost, because there's more sensors and you can't just get a tapping hammer like the old days and knock a bumper back into shape. So that was what we were expecting. What we're actually seeing is actually a lower average per accident cost as well on EVs. We're still trying to understand why. Is it that when they do have an accident, they just tend to not be very big accidents? Or is it that people like them because they're lovely and shiny and they sort of keep reporting everything, whereas they weren't necessarily reporting everything on the diesels? We're still trying to get underneath the sort of hood of that one, exactly what it is. But we're actually seeing much lower costs associated with them currently. We haven't had any major issues. I would say, with one brand exception, which is the most popular brand with the drivers and the least popular with the fleet team. Begins with a T, and the drivers love them, and dealing with them is an absolute nightmare from a fleet perspective. So they're a challenge, but otherwise it's been pretty positive actually.
I wasn't as polite as you, Simon. I named them.
I'd have to agree with you there, being a driver. But that's a good point, and thanks for those inputs. Lorna, I know you touched on certain driver populations that don't have the luxury of a off-road parking for charging. How are you finding people that cannot charge at home? I don't know if you've got many EV vans yet, but how are you finding the van populations, particularly who take the vans home at night, if they haven't got a home charger? How are they coping with that scenario?
We're not having any issues at all. As I said, we've given them all the cards in the same way we do with the diesels. They're learning themselves. They are remembering to charge. What we are actually seeing is a slight decline, or we did in the summer, a slight decline in the frequency of charge as their range anxiety started to dissipate, which is a trend you see with all drivers out there. But we haven't really had any issues. Now, that could be because we've still got those people fairly local and their mileage is low, and we haven't tested the boundaries yet with some of the other drivers in the more rural locations. But we'll come across that at some point in time. But at the moment, we're not having any issues, and they've adopted it really well. I was expecting a bit of a fight, and I haven't had one.
Okay. Is that the same for you, Simon?
I think maybe we've taken a slightly different approach. I think Laura and I are doing a lot of the same things, but the exact route that we've gone is slightly different in that. So I would say company cars, if people want an EV, have an EV, and if they don't, have an EV, so that they get an EV regardless, and they have to kind of manage that themselves, to be honest. And I think for given their BIC saving, by the time you've explained how much they're going to save in that, most people tend to be fairly happy to be fairly flexible, and so cars I really wouldn't worry about. Of course, we will always put a charger in someone's home if they can have it, because that's the easiest option and it's the best route forward. But if they can't, then it's still no problem. On vans, we've got about 55% of our drivers can have home charging, and then we've got another 5 to 10% of the vans which are site based. So we're prioritizing that 60-ish% of our fleet, which is 3 and a bit thousand vehicles. So we're getting those vehicles moved across first, and at the same time I'm lobbying as hard as I can, and EV100, AFP, UK Electric Fleet Coalition, and trying to get all of those people behind it as well, is we need to sort out on-street infrastructure, because the AA say it's 35% of people don't have off-street parking. The RAC say it's a third. We see it as 45%. So let's call it 40%-ish of the country doesn't have that. And they tend to be the lower paid members of society. And there's a real risk that means that the lowest paid get left behind in the zero carbon mobility transition. And that's wrong on every level, and so we need to get that done. There's absolutely a role for the great stuff like Grid Server doing with electric forecourt, with more rapid chargers on the primary road network. Of course, that's really important. But fundamentally, the best thing about an EV is if you can get in it every morning, or when your shift starts, whenever that is, and it's fully charged. And the example I always use are these things. You can't see it with my magic background. The mobile phone, which if I said you had to go and sit somewhere every day to charge it for 45 minutes to an hour, you'd probably still be using a landline. So if you can charge it overnight and then use it for the whole day on the basis of that, that's got to be optimal. So there are absolutely ways around it, and you can find ways around it, but we should be putting that infrastructure in place. And if you just do the simple maths on how many charge points that is, it's a lot. We're probably talking about 8 million or something on the street charge points nationally. But if they cost £1,000 each to put in, that's £8 billion. And so far, the government have said they're going to spend 28 billion on the road network. Well, if I was
950 million on the super rapid motorway service network.
Sure, but 28 billion was actually building roads. Was what I'm talking about. And if I was saying what do you prioritise, well, you need to be able to charge the vehicles if they're all going to be electric. Otherwise, the fact you've got roads to drive them on is kind of irrelevant. So, I'd suggest that there's probably a little bit of a rebalancing needs to do there. So. I do think that's a challenge, and I'm concerned about it. But for me, it's 3 years down the road that it really hits us as when we look at our transition. So the next 3 years of my life are, as well as managing the not insignificant challenge of the 4,000 vehicles that we need to do between now and then, is also try and get that change happening to policy and to infrastructure development, so that everyone on this call can move to electric. Not just, this doesn't help me as a business, as it were, but it's what we all need. So I think it's really, really important that we get that on-street charging infrastructure in place nationally, rather than devolving it to 400 different local authorities to all do their own thing.
Yeah.
So if I can just come in again, James, because I was rudely interrupted Simon there. But it goes back to the point I made on my slide earlier as well, which is, whilst I agree with Simon, and that's one of the challenges going forward, it's the same as the 4x4 challenge going forward, but we are moving so fast, and it's a case of not panicking. Don't let that stop you yet, because technology and things will come in place. There's lots of working groups set up. There's lots of government consultations going through at the moment. The money is starting to come out. The commercial sectors are starting to look at doing these things. So the solutions will come. So don't panic about them not being there today. We're always going to have this. There's more demand than there is charging points, then there's more charging points than there is demand. And it's just going to keep going round and round until you eventually get where we need to get to.
100% agree,
yeah.
Lorna. The don't panic message, I thought, was fantastic. It's absolutely right. I mean, if you do all cars, and let's say the 60% of your vans that can charge at home or at site, or whatever your own business looks like, that's going to be probably 80+% of most people's fleet. So even if you do that and then worry about the 20% in a point in the future, that's a superb start. So yeah, I mean, most of the challenges you only really identify once you've got 100+ vehicles on the road. So crack on and get going, absolutely, and don't panic. I love that. It's like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy all over again, Lorna. I might have to get a towel with it on.
I think
that's Army. Don't panic.
We're rapidly running out of time, and the problem is, on a subject like EVs, we could be answering questions probably to Christmas Eve. But I think the best thing is, sorry to everyone that has asked questions on this webinar. We haven't got to them. There's things about insurance and other areas, but we're just not going to get to cover that today. But please, we'll try our best to answer those questions, or get in touch with the AFP Admin Centre. And I'll hand back now to Julie.
Thank you, guys. Before we close, I'd like to hand back to Paul, who's going to launch the AFP Best Practice Fleet Policy Guide for electric vehicles.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Simon and Lorna, for your excellent presentations and panel debates. I really enjoyed that. So as the AFP, we are obviously committed to supporting our members. We are the industry body for fleet operators, fleet managers and fleet professionals in the marketplace. And I think, it's obvious, I think, to everybody that 2021 and beyond, the key topic for our industry now is fleet electrification. The speed at which we as an industry are moving forward with this topic is awesome and frightening. And even if I'm honest, I never expected the pace to be this quick. And it's not just Simon and Lorna, it's everybody that's moving forward quickly on this topic within the industry, which is just amazing to see. So because of that, your topic becomes our topic, and rightly so. So we are launching our EV support charter today. The Association of Fleet Professionals is 100% committed to fast tracking the EV adoption in the UK marketplace, whether it's fleet or personal cars, whatever we can do to support that electrification process. Because of that, we've got, for supporting our members, our online helpline and the phone line as well, and obviously we've got our admin centre. So if our members have ever got any questions on how to electrify their fleet, the challenges that they're currently going through with electrification topics, the challenges of some of their employees with this or some of their stakeholders, please get in touch. We're here to support you. We are also starting to provide best practice documents and education for the industry and for our members. And obviously, we will continue to make sure that we're lobbying on conditions that we need as fleet operators to get to the 2030 targets that have been laid down by the government. And that's not about criticising what the government can or can't do for us. We're in it together. So we just need to drive this agenda forward. and make sure that we can deliver what we need. And we do need some support from the government. You know, I keep on saying in a lot of these webinars that we need to see the tax tables for the second half of the decade. But actually, the speed of development at the moment is great. So let's keep the cadence going. Let's keep the pedal to the metal, and let's keep on going as an industry for this. So today, I'm really pleased to be launching a couple of things. The first thing is the committee has now drafted its first set of 3 documents on best practice. I'd just like to say these are for cars. Obviously, they will have some use on vans. Vans will come for sure, coming out of the LCV committee and maybe the EV committee as well. But the first set are for cars and car adoption. The first document that we've produced is a Mythbusters document that will help you provide some communication flow to your employees about all the questions they may have about running and having an electric vehicle. And really that document is designed to try and just take some of the concerns away and ease with the adoption process that you've got within your fleet community and your employee base. The next document that we've developed is an EV policy deployment hints and tips, and this is really a roadmap for you guys as fleet managers, fleet operators to start thinking about the EV topic and what you want to do around home charging, whether you want to pay for home charging unit or not. What do you want to do about FEVs, which obviously in the committee sessions created a lively debate as well. But anything around the EV topic, it's designed really to be able to be a document for you guys to just be able to go through as a tick box exercise and say, yep, this is what I'm going to do. And the final document is some wording and guidance for your fleet policy. And we're not suggesting that fleet managers have a completely separate policy for running electric vehicles. You don't have different policies if you've got a diesel vehicle or you've got a petrol vehicle. This is just the additional policies that we think as a committee and as a body that you guys need to add into your fleet policy to make sure that you're kind of covered, and also you've got best practice in there. So James, next slide, please. The other thing that we're launching today is, as part of our Fleet Academy program, the ICFM, we're launching our EV Fleet Manager training course. The first course will be run on March the 16th. So if you wish to sign up, please get in touch with us either on our website or directly contact the admin centre. The courses after the 16th of March will be run on a demand basis. It will obviously, the first one will be done on Zoom and Teams, depending on the audience about what they can or can't use. But it will cover evaluating your current fleet and the potential to electrify, analysing the cost and carbon benefits of transitioning to electric, the transition, how to deal with the transition, and developing the infrastructure to support your electrification programme, and operational ongoing measurement. How do you ensure that your electric fleet is being run effectively and you are running it effective for a business as usual component as well. So we're quite excited by the course. We'd like to think that you guys would like a course like this. So as I say, if you're interested, please contact the admin centre and book yourself up on the course, please. Next slide, James. And this is just a final slide from me. This is what the documents look like. They will be going online on our website this afternoon. So please go online and download them as AFP members. Our website, just so you're aware, is theafp.co.uk. And I'm hoping that we'll get some good feedback from them as well. And hopefully they'll be there to be able to support you guys to be able to go on your path to electrify your fleets. And anything else that we can do to support you, please get in touch. The committee is always interested to know what your real topics are as well that you want some thought leadership on. So if there's anything that we can do to support you as an industry, Lorna and Simon are around on that committee as well. Please get in touch. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you, Paul. I'd like to thank Lorna and Simon once again for the excellent presentations, and obviously for your continued support. And obviously thank you all for attending today. I hope you found this informative and useful and helpful in terms of setting your strategy for the EV journey. And obviously finish by wishing you all a Merry Christmas, and hope you have a good time in spite of limitations. And let's hope 2021 is a better year for everyone. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, guys. Enjoy Christmas.
Thank you.
See you in the new year.
Bye.
Bye.